Welcome to another episode of Effing the Ineffable. I am Lonnie Milbus. Today I would like to start with a question. What is reality? Everyone has a concept of what reality is. We use the word as if it's an absolute in our dealings with one another and our transactions. But as with everything, perspective has a lot to do with our own individual and subjective concepts of reality. In terms of an objective sense of reality, I've been working through the Mandukya Upanishad, which deals with that in two parts. One is the nature of self, an examination of the self, if you will. And the second part of it is an examination into Om, which is a divine reverberation, the name of the Absolute. Essentially every God in its own particular aspects takes on a name, but at the root, the essence, the substance of that is Om. So every God would be called Om. It does this first by, actually, I don't want to go into that yet. This isn't a Mandukya podcast or recording, so I don't want to get too deep into that. But talking about reality, a lot of my life I spent thinking of the physical world as being the reality, things that I could touch, things that I could that felt solid to the senses, if you will. And as time has gone by, and as I've learned and grown, I've learned more about the temporary nature of such things of the senses, and the flaws of the senses, the flaws of the interpretive element of the intellect, the brain, the mind, regarding sensory detail and how that can change over time. Such as, when you're young, children may not like a taste of a particular food. For me, it was Brussels sprouts when I was younger. My reality was that Brussels sprouts tasted horrible. No one should ever taste them. And as I've grown older, I've grown a taste for Brussels sprouts. I quite like them, actually. And so the reality is no longer the foul taste. The Brussels sprout has changed. So the reality of the Brussels sprout must not have changed, but my perspective of it has. So with such a flawed instrument, one that changes in regard to everything, for with varying perspective, changing angles, looking at things in a different way, we're going to see a different reality of objects in each of those instances. So how can we define a reality that is singular in a sense? We can't have reality be a term that seems, it alludes to something absolute. There is the real, there is the unreal in those terms. It has an opposite, and real very much means that this does exist. Now, I did look up some definitions, and one of them that struck me was quite in harmony with what was in the Mandukya Upanishad, and was talking about something that reality means that it has existence and substance. Now, when we talk about existence, again, are we talking about collections of atoms and cells that have coagulated into a being that seems to shine forth either as a vehicle of or through consciousness? The physical body, is that real? Is that substantive? Does that have existence? I believe most people who are on a spiritual path would not so emphatically assume that is so, as the body is temporary, and its temporary nature can be used to argue that it doesn't exist, because existence implies non-temporal nature. And this is where we get to what all the mystical systems that I have encountered kind of points to, and that's that our true nature is not at our body. We've discussed this in previous episodes, that the body is not who the self is. The self is not the body. The self then, as and this Upanishad also argues and elucidates the point that the self truly is the one non-dual and absolute consciousness pervading all living things and all sentient things for sure, but essentially everything that can be seen or felt or that has form or appearance of any kind, that the consciousness pervading all of that is self. And if we take reality in that sense, consciousness would have substance, and it's unchanging substance, in that if I say I'm hungry and I'm identifying self with what is hungry, I'm identifying with body, stomach, a feeling in the stomach, a shakiness, slowing of thought. So those are the things I'm calling I at that time. But when in reality but the body is hungry. The I is not hungry. If I examine those moments of hunger from a state such as now where I'm satisfied, I can remember the I in that state was not different than it is now. It was the same I. It witnessed the appearances within consciousness in the same manner. There wasn't a different quality to it. It was just experiencing different sensations. So I wasn't hungry, such as other statements. I am confused would be a statement that is identifying self with the mind, obviously, the mind and the perception of material reality or material habit, material circumstance as I understand it. So I am confused is the mind is not interpreting the information that is the input, the information input. It's probably a disharmony between expectation and that input that is causing the confusion, but it's certainly not something happening to I. I is just experiencing that. I is not latching on to the thoughts and internalizing them because of some disharmony within the system of receiving that knowledge. So thinking of times that myself, that I as a human have felt confused, I can examine the consciousness in that. What was the I, the witness consciousness, which is what the Mandukya Upanishad and again all these mystical systems point to that as the self. It's the witness consciousness. You can hear a lot of that in Ram Dass. But it's the one that's watching, the one that's always watching. It's not making the judgments. It's not using the senses. It's not indulging. It's not ebbing and flowing. It's constant. It's a constant witness of everything that we encounter and experience. So again, examining a state of confusion to what the witness consciousness was doing in that time, It was the same, unchanged. It's the same witness consciousness. Now, what the Mandukya Upanishad asks, or at least the Karikas and how it's presented through this particular version, which I was studying through a podcast from Vedanta Society of New York, is if you're examining yourself, the nature of self, as it does, it lays it out into 3 aspects, actually 4 aspects. Not actually 4 aspects, more on that later, but we're discussing it as if it were 4 aspects. 1 is the waker and the waking world. 2 is the dreamer and the dream world. And 3 is the deep sleeper and the blankness of deep sleep. Now, all 3 of those, the I pervades. So the waker experiences the waking world as this I, this witness consciousness. That same witness consciousness can be seen very obviously, very easily in the dreamer and the dream world. It's there as well. One thing that comes up is an argument about okay, well, how come someone who's sleeping, so if someone is sleeping, another person who is awake can go over and wake them up. Therefore, that couldn't be the true I, because they're bringing them out of that. But if you examine, and this is a particular thing from the Course, that if you examine, say, in a dream you ate a meal or anything, if you think right now as you're listening to this of any dream that you can remember, just remember, it doesn't have to be a lot, just a circumstance where the consciousness is witnessing something happening in a dream. And if you take that and look at the I, you're just examining the I of that witness consciousness, and then go into any memory from the waking world, say what you ate for breakfast yesterday, and examine the witness, the I consciousness in that. Now bring those 2 snapshots or investigations, how you view those 2 I consciousness. So that one that was witnessing whatever the dream was, and the one that was witnessing what you ate for breakfast yesterday. And examine the quality of those memories. And the quality of those memories will be found to be strikingly similar. Neither of them feels like now. They'll both seem far off, past, but one would not seem more real than the next. And the similarities of the I again, as I was pointing out in the other states of identifying with hunger and with confusion, just as examples, but those I witness consciousness that are examined there should be unchanged from all of these. As it certainly is with me, that anytime I can go back and remember an experience of waking or dreaming or anything that I've experienced, the I within that's witnessing, that silent I, is always the same. And that is one of the central tenets of almost all mysticism, and all spiritual work in discovering the nature of self, is that I is unchanging. The central I, the absolute I, not the ego I. The ego I is the ego that needs to, attain status, needs to be careful when it walks down the street, in a bad neighborhood or whatnot. It needs to stay out of the rain, all of the personal concerns. That's the ego I, that's the little I. That's not at all what we're talking about. What we're talking about is that still and silent I that witnesses all of it. There has to be a differentiation there. That's what pretty much all of these, Buddhism, yoga, magic, Christianity, all of the religions, all of the mystical systems at the center of these religions. I'm not saying straight religion, not church religion. Those don't teach these things. They don't usually teach the mystical systems at the core of their beliefs. They just teach the beliefs instead of getting to the reasons for the beliefs and the faiths. But that all of them teach that this witness consciousness, this silent I that just sits at the forefront of now, this moment. It's not in the past. It can experience me remembering something from the past, but it's experiencing me remembering it now. It's not actually going back and experiencing. This I, this self, this true identity, this reality, if you will, of who we are, is now, is always now. And in that sense, it did not begin and it does not end. That this central now consciousness, the I that I am when all else is quiet or has passed, and when it doesn't, frankly, it's there anyway. It's there at all times. But it exists without beginning and without end. And it never changes. Therefore, it has the qualifications of substantive and existing. It exists now. The memory doesn't exist now. So, the ego memories. So all of the little ego things, of course, can be proven. I don't have time now. Hopefully, we can do that over time if anyone is interested in hearing more about that. But, any experience you have that's past does not exist. A memory might exist, some lingering scar or joy or trinket in your collection of belongings or something might exist, but that memory, that event does not exist. It's gone. That which experienced it does exist, as it has never left now. Now has pervaded all of this, the past, present, and future. Again, existing without time, proving that it has existence. In fact, it is existence. So consciousness, which is reality, which is the only reality, is existence itself, and therefore cannot be made to not exist. It doesn't change, it's unchanging, so it could not change from existence to non-existence. Because then if you say, well, it doesn't exist, then what doesn't exist? That argument, there's a logical fallacy there. You can't have existence not existing, or then your argument is flawed. You can't, because then you're arguing something exists or does not exist, then it has to exist. So in that question of what is reality, we need to be careful. We need to be careful with our realities and with things that maybe we're holding on to or attached to that may be subject to change. And the best way to do that, in my opinion and the opinion of those from whom I've learned, is to not detach from everything, but to attach to what is permanent, to what is existence, to that consciousness, to that witness consciousness. And one way we can get to that is through meditation, through being silent, listening to and examining ourselves, contemplative meditation, But yeah, just always remembering what is happening to me is not me. What I've done is not me. What I am doing is not me. What is me is the witness of all of this. And at that level, all beings, all people, all everything, all animals, all anything that could, has, or will ever exist in the entire universe is one. That consciousness is non-dual. Again, you can't have the existence and the non-existence. So we get into the non-duality. They call it, for the Vedanta Society, where I'm learning this from the Mandukya Upanishad, is Advaita. I think Advaita means non-dual. I sure hope so. If I'm wrong, please let me know in the comments or somewhere, and I will apologize profusely. But Advaita, non-dual. And the reason it has to be non-dual is we reach a point where one argument for non-duality can be made with causality. You say, why non-dual? Why consciousness? Now, consciousness being the witness, the cause of everything, as in within the Mandukya Upanishad, you have the waking world, dreamer, dream world, sleeper, and deep sleep. Those three are all appearances. They're not realities. The reality is the I within each of them. So those appearances are not so much caused, because the sleep, they describe the deep sleep. The Upanishad describes the deep sleep as the causal state. The dreamer and dream world as the subtle body, and the waker and the waking world as the gross state. And the deep sleep is causal because to transition between waking and dreaming, one passes through that deep sleep. So it's like all of the potentials of the karma contained within the other two aspects are held within the deep sleep, but they're not manifest there. So it's an earlier stage. It's like the seed of the other two. So, in that realization, the reality is none of the three of those. The reality is the consciousness behind those. The pure consciousness. Those are conscious appearances, whereas consciousness itself is the underlying pervasive reality of those three appearances. So this is where we don't actually have three or four aspects. We are naming four aspects of the one consciousness that is all of these. The other three are just appearances of that consciousness. So, with the reality being the consciousness, the reality being non-dual, there can't be any conversation outside of consciousness. There can't be an examination of without consciousness. we can't talk about that. That doesn't, you need consciousness to even, for there to be anything at all. That's certainly to discuss it. So in that sense, it's non-dual. And I'm not going to take too much of the teachings from. You can just go to Vedanta Society, check out their podcasts or their YouTube channels and things like that. If you want to know more about it, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert, but I did find it very interesting, and I do find it exactly in line with some of the elements of Magic and the AA system, of which I'm a lot more familiar. And I feel as though this absolute, this consciousness that is being discussed very much is in line with a perspective on Kether. And that's, of course, a non-dual perspective on Kether, whereas, as we all know, as Kabbalists, for anyone else that's a magician as well, working AA system or any other Golden Dawn or anything of that nature that uses the Tree of Life, that all of the emanations from Kether are illusion. Kether only becomes Chokmah when reflecting itself, when manifesting, very similarly to what is being talked about in the Mandukya Upanishad. So then, of course, you have the self-reflection. That's Aleister Crowley had the mathematical equation 0 equals 2, defining this relationship. And of course, when you have 2, you have a third, because you have 1, you have the other, and you have both. So you have to have the third coming from that. There's an inevitability until you get through 10. In Arabic numerals is 1-0, which shows a return back into the 0. So it made sense. So it was some food for thought. Thought I wanted to share any insight I had there. I just was thinking about that word reality, and in this light of consciousness being the basis of everything, and that very consciousness within you that you would refer to as I, before any impressions or experiences, or before your parents named it, or anything else, just that pure consciousness, that state within that witnesses, that lights the body, that comes to life, that brings up, vegetables from the mud, trees from the ground, and all of these things. That consciousness is the pure reality, and the best thing we can do for ourselves, and something that the world desperately needs right now, is for people to focus on and rest in that consciousness, where we find no division, no desperation. Really, if spending enough time there, I've been finding, it's great for doing the detachment from desire and from aversion. Nothing really can affect you in that space. And they say that in that term, enlightenment, one of the hallmarks of enlightenment is an absence of fear. And in that sense, this is it, really. This realization, if we can make it a realization and not just yes, I understand that, not a mental observation, but an actual realization, to where we're identifying self with consciousness, and not the egos, not the emotions, not the thoughts, not the senses, not what we're driving, not any of that, but truly identifying ourselves with pure consciousness as a witness of this entire world and all of the entire worlds and all of our states and all of those three appearances, then the world could our world could be in a much better place. Anyway, not here to tell you what the goals are, just here to provide the insights that I get, and I hope you enjoyed this one. I would like to discuss it more. This feels like a kind of an introduction, a treatment, perhaps even a journal entry. But any questions or thoughts, please share. And I thank you for listening. Till next time.